So why has karting become so expensive? Well, it has and it hasn't. Let me explain. So you can't go 5 minutes in motorsport without hearing someone complain about the rising costs of karting. At the World Championship, awash with massive motorhomes, I heard figures hovering around the £20,000 mark, and that was on the low end. The sport has become somewhat crazy, but why? Especially when the actual product itself doesn't seem to offer the kind of value that £20,000 and that kind of thing suggests. So let's try a little thought experiment. Imagine if, by competing in karting between the ages of 8 and 16, a driver permanently lost their chance to ever race in F1. What do you think would happen to karting? I believe it would probably collapse overnight. Now, ask the same question, but imagine it's 1965. I don't believe karting would change that much. Back then, it was a competition valued for its own merit, and also because 95% of the drivers were probably over 16, something I highlight in my adult exodus from karting video. So, this is what I call karting's F1 problem, and I want to explore the wider implications. Josh Hill, son of 1996 F1 world champion Damon Hill, recently discussed the issue of elite karting on the Backstreet Drivers podcast. He said, "How many karting world champions are there? It's like a dime a dozen. I'm not taking anything away from them, it's insanely competitive. But you can fall into the rabbit hole of karting. I raced against a couple of people who had done loads of karting, but I was on par with them. So you think, what was the point of all that karting? So why do people spend insane amounts of money on something that seemingly doesn't seem to offer that much benefit?" Conspicuous consumption and karting. The term conspicuous consumption, coined by economist Thorstein Veblen in his 1899 work The Theory of Leisure Class, an economic study in the evolution of institutions, describes spending on luxury goods not for practical value, but to display wealth and maintain social status. In karting, a more modern concept, this translates into people spending vast amounts of money on major championships, not necessarily to win or impress talent scouts, but to flaunt their wealth essentially, to show the world how rich they are. Well, when people constantly complain about how expensive karting has become on TV and so on, it creates an environment where some, though not all, I'll admit, use it as an opportunity to display their wealth. Ironically, the constant complaints about the insane levels of spending encourage the wealthier of society to come in. If one can afford this notoriously expensive sport, it signals that you must be extremely wealthy. So what lit the fuse? Karting has always dealt with complaints about costs and wealth. We should emphasise this. It's nothing new. It's been there ever since the early days. In 1966, there was criticism of Susie Raganelli and her father's wealth. Very unfair criticism, I must say. But this is just to highlight it's nothing new. The levels of spending we see across the paddock now, however, seem a little far out of kilter to what the sport actually is and represents. However, when karting became synonymous with the F1 ladder, inflationary pressures spiralled out of control. Success in karting started to be linked to future success in F1, increasing the pressure to win and, well, be in it. But as that pressure to win grew and the supply of wins pretty much stayed limited, spending skyrocketed. ITV's 1996 show Champions of the Future cemented karting as the pathway to F1. The iconic images of Lewis Hamilton winning in his cadet kart has been burned into the collective consciousness of karting and has reinforced this message that karting is the pathway to F1. Now, he was an exceptional talent, but with his success being broadcast on national television, the message became clear. To get to F1, you must follow his path. As a result, the perceived value of karting rose, and with it, prices and spending. Measurable inflation. Karting's base level costs have risen well beyond inflation. I've monitored this closely over the years. Comparing 1990 and 2024 shows a staggering 90% increase in the inflation adjusted price of new karts. For example, in 1990, a decent kart, like a PCR, cost around £790 plus VAT, and that's before I adjusted for inflation, just so you know. Today, a modern OTK kart costs roughly £3,550 plus VAT. Of course, mandatory crash protection features alone add about £300 to modern cars, with sticker kits adding another £160 or so. But even removing these extras, the cost is still about 65% higher than 1990, again adjusted for inflation. In the UK dominant classes like Rotax and X30 in the UK, they require soft tyres, even at club level. This has further inflationary costs without making the sport more accessible or better. In 1990, the dominant tyre was the Bridgestone YBN used in the 100 Britain classes. a cheap and more durable option. Price versus quality, the psychological trap. Another psychological quirk in karting is the association of higher prices with better quality, even when the evidence doesn't really support it. If you're building a chassis and you think you can undercut rivals by offering a lower price, well, think again. In karting, where the fear of making the wrong choice means losing, pricing your product higher might actually boost sales. An upside down way of thinking, but it's how humans work. Cheap sometimes means slow, expensive means fast, even if it isn't actually true. But it's not all bad. Hopefully I've highlighted here that the perceived ever-increasing costs are really a result of value perception and psychology, even if we note the real inflation that has occurred. Karting can be done on an incredibly small budget, which I hope to have achieved with my budget kart challenge a few years ago. Please go and watch it if you can, and also watch the video of Karts on Cars, because it just highlights how accessible karting can be. So, how to change things? Well, it's a big task. Karting needs to divorce itself from F1's influence entirely, I think. This cultural shift could help reduce inflationary pressure. However, while such a change might be easy culturally, it would be more difficult economically, especially with the amounts of money involved here. But a simple rejection of F1, stepping stones, grassroots language, well, it can go a long way to change perceptions. And when perception seems to drive the insane levels of spending we see, it's a bigger and more influential change than you can imagine. But junior karting in particular could also benefit from a change in approach by the governing bodies, like Motorsport UK, however unlikely this may be. Motorsport UK and the Football Association, for example, take contrasting approaches. At the heart of this argument lies the balance between development and competition. The FA's approach, as outlined in its youth review, prioritises the holistical development of young footballers, avoiding the publication of league tables for under-11s. The rationale is clear. The focus should be on nurturing talent, not on chasing titles, and promoting the joy of the game. Motorsport UK, with its fully fledged British Championship system for young drivers, may need to reassess whether the pursuit of major titles at such an early age is in the best interest of the long-term growth and well-being of these young karters. Freeing them from the pressure of F1 aspirations and the like may be beneficial to them and the sport as a whole. Motorsport, especially karting, relies heavily on the financial contributions of parents. But is it ethical to base the sport's financial sustainability on this? The FA, by avoiding major titles for young footballers, acknowledges the potential pitfalls. In conclusion, karting isn't inherently expensive. Of course, it's not the cheapest and most affordable hobby, but it isn't that bad either. What is really expensive is getting to F1. By addressing karting's F1 problem and trying to remove its influence from the sport, we could make karting more accessible without any dilution.